We have to talk about the banks, about actually having proper control over the banks that we bailed out, about creating jobs as Germany have done, for example, in renewable energy, good, properly paid, skilled jobs that can give people a secure future. Those are the things we need to be talking about. But above all else, we've got to realise this. We don't get change because of the generosity and goodwill of the people at the top. We get change because of the struggle and sacrifice of people from below. All social change happens because of that struggle from below. Now, my favourite quote is this. It's a quote from Frederick Douglass. He was an African-American statesman in the 19th century. He's a freed slave. And he said this: "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will." And he was absolutely right. The way we get change is by forcing our demands on those at the top, forcing them to listen. So what we have to do is this. We have to rally around a coherent alternative that gives people hope. We've got to give a voice to those who are otherwise airbrushed out of existence. And if we can do that, we can not only take on this government and take on austerity, we can lay the foundations for building a new Britain altogether and a new Scotland. We stand together, we fight together, and we will win this together. Thank you.
I think we could have a couple of questions from the floor or points if people wanted to come back to it. Yeah. It's not like question time then.
Kezia, credit unions are absolutely fantastic, but the biggest problem with the folk that I work with is they don't have the money to pay into in the first place. Ken, that's all right for folk that still have money yet, but for the folk that are at the bottom, they didn't have the money to put in for to get the money back out, so it's hard. Owen, I just love you to bits, and honestly, I must be your biggest fan. Ken, I mean, you just need to get me in there for to get the voice heard, but I think after the stories that will go to my blog and the other reporters are more than I'll certainly kind of chase the government sideways. I don't want to hog the conversation.
Sure, that was a question. I don't know. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Ian McInnes. I come through from Glasgow today, and I'm sure we're going to have a great conference. I'd just like to take up something that Owen mentioned about housing. I've been campaigning the housing for a couple of decades now, and one of the biggest cons that has happened is something, everybody talks about social housing. It was one of Thatcher's right-hand guys that started using the term social housing extensively. The whole idea of using the term social housing, I know it existed prior to that, but it was to create a fudge, a fog, a camouflage, so that they could back and give financing to housing associations, which would be called social housing, as opposed to council housing. We need to be talking about public housing that is accountable to the public. So that's all. Thanks very much.
Did you want to talk to that?
I think that's a really, really important point.
Exploited the housing crisis to say there's not enough housing to go round. Why is it being given to people like that? But if we actually hadn't built housing for all, you wouldn't get those tensions being exploited. So housing, in many ways, is an absolute core of any alternative to create an economic alternative, create mixed communities, and stop communities turning in on themselves and that being exploited by the like of the fascists.
Kezia, did you want to come in?
I just want to pick up on the points made about payday loan companies. I mean, you're absolutely right. But I think the way to change that is to create a climate where credit unions just aren't for poor people. We should all be banking with credit unions. We should be able to build the membership of credit unions so that they can offer current accounts and that there is a real credible, sustainable alternative to our high street banks. But let me just say this. At the moment, the people who take out payday loans are people who are in work, because you need to be able to evidence that you had a paycheck last month to take one out. So it's not necessarily, your idea of who's taking out payday loans is not necessarily who you think it is. 75% of people who take them out are in work. The majority are under 35, and they also tend to be young men. That's why they end up sponsoring big football clubs. But the point is that next year, when universal credit comes in, you will have to have a bank account in order to get your benefits. What that means is the 1 million unbanked people across the United Kingdom will suddenly have to start getting bank accounts. In Scotland, that represents about 125,000 people. So now is a critical point to build the credit union movement, so that when that comes in, there is an alternative to high street banking. And that's why I think we just really have to go for it and not give up on the power and the potential that credit unions have.
My friend, you had your hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very simple question. We've had a number of speakers who have trade unions and STUC, PUC and all the rest of it. And I know that they're considering the question of a general strike. And in terms of low pay and all those sorts of things, I just wonder what the panel thinks about the idea of having a general strike as one way of bringing everybody together in that fight against austerity and low pay.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The last strike we had on November the 30th was the biggest strike since 1926. The general strike, which took place in 1926, my great-granddad took part in the 1926 general strike. He was a train driver who went on strike in solidarity with the miners and had his pay docked, and it caused it was a huge sore, which was passed on throughout my family, and it's still spoken about today. And the point about strike action, I mean, first we've got to make the point about trade unions, which are demonised by the press. Trade unions remain the biggest democratic movement in the country, representing over 6 million people. They represent pillars of our society, whether they be dinner ladies or supermarket workers, call centre workers, nurses, teachers, and so on. And they are representing working people who have been made to pay for a crisis they had nothing to do with. Now, those public sector workers who went on strike courageously in November, they went on strike on the basis that they were being made to pay for a crisis they had nothing to do with, that by the time of the next election, on average, they're estimated they will be 16% poorer than they were when this government came to power. And as I've said, the only way you get change in this country is through struggle, by people collectively making their voices heard. So that is one way, having a general strike, coordinated strike action that can take place. But at the same time, the trade unions and what they aren't doing at the moment is try to broaden out their membership, because what's happened because of the savage attacks of Thatcherism, because of rapid deindustrialisation, over half of public sector workers are unionised, but in the private sector it's just 14% now, and most of those workers are people who've been contracted out from public services, the old utilities, the railways, for example. So the problem with at the moment, if we had coordinated strike action, mobilising people in the private sector would be very difficult indeed. Now, one thing Unite are doing, and I'm a member of Unite, as I'm sure many of you are as well, Unite have got a new community membership scheme, and what that is doing is trying to organise people who are unemployed, for example. Now, back in the 20s and 30s, we had the National Union of Unemployed Workers, and I think today we need the same sort of thing. We need a movement representing unemployed people as well, because mass unemployment isn't just bad for unemployed people, it drags down the terms and conditions and wages of everybody else, because employers know they've got an army of unemployed people outside waiting, so why should they give their existing workers a pay rise? So my position is quite clear. I support, without any reservations, coordinated strike action by working people to defend their rights, to force the people at the top to hear their voices, as well as standing in the tradition, very long tradition in this country, of peaceful civil disobedience. Give you one example, UK Uncut, which have a group of activists across the country put tax avoidance back on the agenda. They occupied shops and banks and other businesses, and until they started doing that, and they even got favourable coverage in the Daily Mail, of all papers, no one was talking about tax avoidance. So that's a vindication of that sort of action. So I would link together coordinated strike action, and it must be coordinated to be effective, with those sorts of direct action, if you like, which is a very long and proud tradition in Scotland and across Britain as well.
Thank you, Owen. Kezia, did you want to come on that?
I actually agree completely with Owen on that. It was Labour MSPs and Green MSPs who also refused to go to Parliament on the 30th of November last year when we had our National Day of Action, because it was that important. And the points that Owen makes about increasing the membership of trade unions is also absolutely critical, because I think you make the point in your book as well, Owen, the majority of the working poor in this country work in the service sector and the retail sector, where actually trade union membership is really low. So we need to build up trade union membership in those sectors in particular if the effect of a general strike is going to be as powerful as we need it to be.
Just to say that I wanted a general strike yesterday, but I called it on my own, and that's the problem. Somebody once said, and I know I use this analogy a lot of times, and unfortunately it's not a very nice vision, but I'll tell you what, Mick McGackie, the miners' union, once said, we are many, they are few. And the thing is, if we all spat them together, we'd drown the bastards. The question is, sometimes we spit on a Tuesday, other people spit on a Wednesday, somebody calls it on a Saturday. The whole idea of calling the conferences, and this is only one of hopefully other conferences. I spoke in Falkirk the other day there to a Unite meeting at Len McCluskey, the General Secretary of my union, Unite, was there, and put forward the idea that in Falkirk and in that area that they should call a similar conference. We've tried to call this as a Scottish thing. It ain't going to work like that. It has to be local, it has to be fighting back and whatever. We need to find a way in which, when Owen says about unemployed should join Unite, or the other unions that are offering that kind of membership. I think that if we could do that, unemployed and working people together, right, mobilising, it will make such a huge impact. There is tremendous things going to happen in the next few years. Many of us that went through the decades of horribleness in the 80s and whatever, there is actually people beginning to rebel, revolt and whatever. See, people think that in Greece and France, they must have really powerful unions. No, they've just got off their knees and they're fighting back. It's not true that Greece has these tremendous, huge unions and whatever. No, they've been forced to fight back. That's the situation. 20% of the cuts, 80% still to come. And we can already feel the pain. Poverty is no disease, but it's office there, and it's actually going to be true for another 80% of the cuts that are coming down the line. Well, we're saying we're not having it, we're fighting back, and that's the theme of this conference today, and we've got work today, and you should get on with it.
Okay. Thanks.